Olivia Hayes stared at the massive iron gates of Blackwell Manor, clutching her worn leather purse tightly. The morning was cold, and her old car looked out of place next to the perfectly manicured lawn. She thought about her daughter Emily, probably sitting in class right now, drawing pictures of unicorns with her broken crayons. They needed this job. The rent was 3 months behind, and Emily's asthma medication wasn't getting any cheaper. The job posting had seemed too good to be true. Live-in caretaker, $8,000 a month, all expenses paid. There had to be a catch, and according to the whispers in town, there was. Adrian Blackwell, once the golden boy of Wall Street, had become a recluse after the accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. The last 3 caretakers had quit within a week. Some said he was impossible to work with. Others claimed the house was haunted by his past. Miss Hayes, a stern-looking woman in a grey suit, opened the gate. "I'm Mrs. Reynolds, the house manager. Mr. Blackwell is waiting." Olivia followed Mrs. Reynolds through the garden. Her sensible shoes clicked against the marble floors as they entered the mansion. Everything looked expensive and untouched, like a museum where no one was allowed to sit on the furniture. "A few ground rules," Mrs. Reynolds said, walking briskly. "Mr. Blackwell requires absolute punctuality. Meals are served at specific times. His medication schedule is strict. He needs assistance with personal care, including bathing. If this makes you uncomfortable, please say so now." "I was a nurse's aide before Emily was born," Olivia replied. "I understand what the job requires." Mrs. Reynolds stopped in front of heavy wooden doors. "He's not in a good mood today. Don't take anything personally." She knocked twice and opened the door. The room was dark except for a large window overlooking the ocean. A wheelchair was positioned facing the view, but Olivia could only see its outline. "The new caretaker is here, sir." "Another one?" The voice was deep with an edge of bitterness. "How long do you think this one will last, Reynolds? A day, maybe 2? Olivia stepped forward. "I plan to stay as long as you need me, Mr. Blackwell." The wheelchair turned slowly. Adrian Blackwell looked younger than Olivia had expected, maybe in his late 30s. His black hair was slightly too long, and his face showed signs of someone who had once been handsome but had forgotten to care. His eyes were cold as they assessed her. "That's what they all say," he said. "Tell me, Miss Hayes, Olivia Hayes. Miss Hayes, what makes you different from the others? What makes you think you can handle this job?" Olivia thought about Emily, about the eviction notice on their apartment door, but looking at Adrian Blackwell, she saw something else, loneliness masked as anger. "Because, Mr. Blackwell, I'm not here to handle you. I'm here to help you." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Help me? I'm beyond help, Miss Hayes. I'm a man trapped in a useless body, living in a mansion that's become my prison. But please, by all means, try your best. The guest house is yours. Reynolds will show you your duties. Just don't unpack too much. You won't be staying long." That night in the small but elegant guest house, Olivia called Emily at her sister's place. "How was school, sweetheart?" "I miss you, Mommy. When can I come see you?" "Soon, baby. Mommy needs to get settled first. Are you being good for Aunt Sarah?" "Yes." "Did you meet the man in the wheelchair? Is he scary?" Olivia looked out her window at the main house. A light was on in what she now knew was Adrian's study. "No, honey, he's not scary. He's just lost his way a little." After saying goodnight to Emily, Olivia reviewed the schedules Mrs. Reynolds had given her. Tomorrow would start early, 6 a.m. medications, followed by physical therapy exercises, breakfast, and then bathing. She remembered the coldness in Adrian's eyes, the bitterness in his voice. But she also remembered something else, the way his hands had gripped the wheelchair arms when she walked in, as if he was bracing himself for another disappointment. In the main house, Adrian Blackwell sat in his darkened study, a glass of untouched whiskey on his desk. He could hear the faint sound of Olivia moving around in the guest house, another caretaker, another person who would look at him with pity, another reminder of everything he had lost. "We'll see how long you last, Miss Hayes," he muttered to himself. "We'll see." But something about the way she had stood her ground, the way she had looked at him without flinching, made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. He pushed the thought away. Hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. The next morning came too quickly. Olivia arrived at Adrian's room at exactly 6 a.m., medicine tray in hand. She knocked softly and entered when there was no response. The room was huge, with medical equipment carefully hidden behind expensive furniture. Adrian was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Right on time, Miss Hayes. Come to start your first day of torture?" "Good morning to you too, Mr. Blackwell," Olivia said, walking to his bedside. "I have your morning medications." He took the pills without argument but refused to look at her. Olivia noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" "Sleep is for people who have something to wake up for," he replied. Olivia started preparing the equipment for his physical therapy. "Well, today you have quite a schedule. Physical therapy, breakfast, and then we need to change your bandages." "Ah. Yes, the full service of being reminded how helpless I am. Just what I needed." "You're not helpless, Mr. Blackwell, you're healing." He laughed that hollow laugh again. "Healing? It's been 2 years, Miss Hayes. This isn't healing, this is existence." The physical therapy was hard. Adrian's muscles were stiff from lack of use, and every movement seemed to cause him pain. But Olivia noticed he never complained about the physical discomfort. It was the dependency that bothered him most. "I used to run marathons," he said suddenly, while she helped him with his leg exercises. "Now I can't even scratch my own knee." "The body adapts," Olivia replied, carefully stretching his leg. "But first you have to let it try." "Is that what they taught you in nursing school? Empty promises and fortune cookie wisdom?" "Actually, I learned it from my daughter. She has asthma. Every breath is a fight, but she never gives up." Something changed in Adrian's expression. "You have a daughter, Emily. She's 7, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. Where is she now?" "With my sister, until I'm settled here." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "This is no place for a child." "No place is perfect, Mr. Blackwell. We make the best of what we have." After therapy came breakfast. Mrs. Reynolds had prepared eggs and toast, but Adrian just pushed the food around his plate. Olivia noticed his hands trembling slightly. "The therapy takes a lot of energy. You need to eat. I'm not hungry." "Would you like something else?" "I can cook." He looked at her with surprise. "You cook?" "Nothing fancy. But Emily says my pancakes are magic." For a second, something like a real smile touched his lips. "Magic pancakes, that's quite a claim, Miss Hayes. I'll prove it tomorrow, if you're willing to try." The bathroom routine was next. This was usually when most caretakers quit. Adrian's body bore the scars of the accident that had taken his mobility, and he hated anyone seeing them. "You don't have to do this," he said as she helped him into the specially equipped bathroom. "Reynolds can call an agency nurse." "It's part of my job, Mr. Blackwell. I'm not going anywhere." The scars were worse than she had expected. Long, angry, lines crossed his back and chest, telling the story of surgeries and pain. But it was the newest wounds that worried her. Pressure sores from lying in bed too long. "These need better care," she said, gently cleaning one particularly red area. "Why bother? They'll just come back." "Because you deserve better care. These can be prevented." He was quiet as she finished bathing him, but she could feel him watching her, maybe waiting for signs of disgust or pity. He found neither. Later that morning, while Adrian was resting, Olivia found Mrs. Reynolds in the kitchen. "You've lasted longer than the others," the older woman said, arranging flowers in a vase. "The others didn't see what I see." "And what's that?" "A man who's given up, but not because he wants to, because he thinks he has to." Mrs. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. "Be careful, Miss Hayes. Hope can be dangerous, in this house." That afternoon, Olivia called Emily during her break. "Did you make any friends yet, Mommy?" "I'm trying, sweetheart. Some people take longer to become friends. Like Tommy in my class? He was mean at first, but now he shares his cookies with me," Olivia smiled. "Something like that. How about I come visit you this weekend?" "Yes. Can you bring your new friend?" "He's not ready for visitors yet, honey. But maybe someday." In his study, Adrian was looking at old photographs. Him standing at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, running the New York Marathon, sailing his yacht, a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. He heard Olivia's voice from the garden, talking, on her phone, probably to her daughter. She had surprised him today, no pity in her eyes, no hesitation in her touch, just acceptance. Magic pancakes, he muttered, shaking his head. For the first time in months, he found himself looking forward to breakfast. True to her word, Olivia made pancakes the next morning. The kitchen filled with a warm, sweet smell that even brought Mrs. Reynolds in to investigate. Adrian watched from his wheelchair as Olivia moved around the kitchen like she'd always belonged there. "They smell good," he admitted. "Wait until you taste them." Olivia placed a plate in front of him. The pancakes were perfectly golden, topped with fresh berries. "Emily says they make bad days better." Adrian took a bite and closed his eyes. For a moment, the hard lines around his mouth softened. "Your daughter might be right. She usually is." Olivia sat down with her own plate. "She wants to meet you, you know." Adrian's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's not a good idea." "Why not? Look at me, Miss Hayes. I'm not exactly the kind of person children should be around. Children don't care about wheelchairs, Mr. Blackwell. They care about what's in your heart." He pushed his plate away, the moment of peace broken. "Then they definitely shouldn't be around me. My heart died in that accident." Later that day, during physical therapy, Adrian was quieter than usual. Olivia could tell something was bothering him, but she waited. She'd learned that pushing him only made him retreat further. "My brother's coming tomorrow," he finally said while she helped him with his arm exercises. "That's nice. Family support is important." Adrian's laugh was bitter. "James doesn't come for support. He comes to check if I'm still alive so he can keep running my company." "Your company?" "Blackwell Technologies. I built it from nothing. Now James sits in my office, makes decisions with my board, lives my life." He gripped the exercise band tightly. He's probably hoping each visit will be the last. Olivia stopped the exercises and moved to face him. "What do you mean?" "The accident wasn't an accident, Miss Hayes. Someone cut my car's brake lines. The investigation was inconclusive. But I have my suspicions." The revelation hit Olivia hard. She thought about the lonely man in this big house, surrounded by people he couldn't trust. "Have you told anyone? Who would believe me?" The bitter cripple making accusations from his wheelchair. He turned away. "Just be careful tomorrow. James can be charming. That's what makes him dangerous." The next morning, James Blackwell arrived in a sleek black car. He was younger than Adrian, but carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. His smile was perfect, practiced. "Ah, you must be the new caretaker," he said, looking Olivia up and down. "Lasting longer than the others." "I see. Miss Hayes takes good care of me," Adrian said, his voice tight. "Wonderful. Now, brother, we need to discuss some paperwork. Miss Hayes, would you give us privacy?" Olivia hesitated, looking at Adrian. He nodded slightly, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. In the kitchen, Mrs. Reynolds was stress-cleaning the already spotless counters. "That man," she muttered. "Every time he visits, Mr. Blackwell gets worse." "How long has this been going?" "Don, since the accident. Mr. James took control of everything while his brother was in the hospital. Said it was temporary." She scrubbed harder. "Nothing temporary about how he's running things now." Olivia heard raised voices from Adrian's study. Through the door she could make out James's smooth tones. "Be reasonable, Adrian. You're in no condition to run the company. The board agrees with me. Sign the papers, make it official. Get out." Adrian's voice was shaking with anger. "Don't be difficult. Think about your health." "My health? Like you thought about it when you..." "When I what, dear brother?" "Be careful with accusations you can't prove." Olivia had heard enough. She knocked and entered with Adrian's medication tray. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for Mr. Blackwell's medicine." James stepped back, his smile never wavering. Of course, we're done here anyway." He placed some papers on Adrian's desk. "Think about what I said, brother. I'll be back next week." After James left, Adrian sat in silence, staring at the papers. His hands were trembling. "He's going to take everything," he finally said. "My company, my life's work." Olivia put her hand on his shoulder. For the first time, he didn't pull away. "Only if you let him," she said softly. "What choice do I have? Look at me." I am looking at you. I see a man who built something from nothing. The wheelchair doesn't change that. Adrian looked up at her, and for a moment his guard dropped completely. She saw the pain, the fear, but also something else. A spark of the fighter he used to be. Why do you care? He asked. This isn't your battle. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, Mr. Blackwell. Even stubborn billionaires who pretend they don't need anyone. That evening, after helping Adrian to bed, Olivia found a large envelope in the guest house mailbox. Inside were documents about Blackwell Technologies, news articles about the accident, and a handwritten note. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone here is what they seem. She stayed up late reading, her heart growing heavier with each page. The accident report was full of inconsistencies. The company's financial records showed suspicious transfers, and James's rise to power had been too smooth, too planned. Olivia looked at the main house, where a light still burned in Adrian's window. She thought about her daughter, about right and wrong, about the difference one person could make. I'm in your corner, she whispered, whether you like it or not. The weekend came, and Olivia prepared for her visit to Emily. She found Adrian in his study, surrounded by old company files. I'll be back tomorrow evening, she said. Mrs. Reynolds will help with your routine today. Adrian looked up, dark, circles under his eyes suggesting another sleepless night. Tell Emily thank you. For what? The magic pancakes. They really do make bad days better. Olivia smiled. Would you like me to bring her drawing? She made it for you. She made something for me. His voice cracked slightly. Why? Because that's what Emily does. She brings color to people's lives. Adrian wheeled himself to the window. Maybe someday I could meet her, if you think it's appropriate. I think she'd like that very much. At her sister Sarah's house, Emily ran into Olivia's arms. Mummy, did Mr. Wheelchair Man like my drawing? His name is Mr. Blackwell, honey, and I haven't given it to him yet, but he's looking forward to seeing it. Sarah watched them with worried eyes. Later, when Emily was playing in the garden, she confronted Olivia. I heard things about Adrian Blackwell, Sarah said. About the accident, about his brother. Are you sure it's safe working there? He's not dangerous, Sarah. He's hurt. And not just physically. That's what worries me. Hurt people can be unpredictable, or they can be the ones who need help the most. That evening, Emily made another drawing, this one of Adrian in his wheelchair surrounded by butterflies and rainbows. Because everyone needs pretty things around them, she explained. When Olivia returned to the mansion, she found it in chaos. James had visited again, and Adrian was in a dark mood. He's been in his room since morning, Mrs. Reynolds whispered. Won't eat, won't take his medicine. Olivia found Adrian sitting in the dark, an unopened bottle of whiskey on his bedside table. Go away, he said. No. He turned to her, anger masking pain. I don't need your pity. Good, because I'm not offering any. She turned on the lights and opened the curtains. I'm offering pancakes and 2 new drawings from a 7-year-old who thinks you need more. Butterflies in your life. Adrian blinked in the sudden light. What did James tell you when he came? Nothing. I don't talk to James. He'll try to buy you off. They all have a price. Olivia sat down in front of him. Then he doesn't know me very well. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Blackwell, like integrity and friendship. Friendship? He laughed, but it wasn't his usual bitter sound. Is that what this is? What would you call it? I don't know. I haven't had a friend in a long time. Olivia pulled out Emily's drawings. Well, now you have 2, even if one of them thinks butterflies are the solution to everything. Adrian took the drawings with trembling hands. The first one showed him in his garden, surrounded by flowers. The second had him smiling, something Emily had never seen, but had imagined. She made me smile, he said softly. Children see what adults sometimes forget to look for. That night, Adrian asked Olivia to help him into the garden. It was the first time he'd been outside in weeks. The evening air was cool, and the stars were just beginning to appear. I used to know all the constellations, he said. My father taught me when I was young. You could teach Emily. She loves stars. You keep doing that. We're doing what? Planning ahead. Like there's a future worth planning for. Olivia looked at him in the fading light. There is. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it. I'm not brave, Miss Hayes. I'm a coward who hides in his mansion while his brother steals his life. No. You're a survivor who's been fighting alone for too long. She hesitated, then added, but you're not alone anymore. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. The board meeting is next week. James is bringing the final papers for me to sign over the company. And what are you going to do? I don't know, fight back maybe, if I can remember how. Good thing you have someone in your corner who never forgot. The next morning, Adrian asked for his laptop. He spent hours going through old emails, financial records, anything that could help him understand what had happened with his company while he was in the hospital. Olivia brought him lunch, surprised to see him focused and alert. Finding anything interesting? Maybe. James wasn't as careful as he thought. There are traces, patterns. He looked up at her. Would you help me with something? Of course. In my office, there's a safe behind the painting. The combination is Emily's birthday. Olivia froze. How do you know her birthday? Adrian smiled slightly. I pay attention, Miss Hayes, more than people think. In the safe, they found documents that changed everything. Bank statements showing money being siphoned off to offshore accounts, emails between James and the board members discussing plans, made long before the accident. And most damning of all, receipts for work done on Adrian's car just days before the crash. He really did try to kill me, Adrian whispered. Olivia put her hand on his shoulder, feeling him trembling. But he failed. And now we have proof. We? Yes, we. I told you, you're not alone anymore. The discovery of James's betrayal changed something in Adrian. During physical therapy the next morning, he pushed himself harder than ever before. Careful, Olivia warned as he struggled with the weights. You don't want to hurt yourself. I've been hurting for 2 years, he said, his face covered in sweat. But now I'm hurting for a reason. Mrs. Reynolds noticed the change too. She found Olivia in the kitchen later that day. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He asked for his old business clothes this morning. First time since the accident. Olivia was helping Adrian dress when James made an unexpected visit. Through the bedroom door, they could hear him arguing with Mrs. Reynolds. My brother knows I'm coming today, James's voice carried up the stairs. Mr. Blackwell is not available right now. Mrs. Reynolds held firm. Adrian's hands shook as he tried to button his shirt. Olivia stepped in to help. You don't have to see him, she said softly. Yes, I do, but this time I'm ready. He looked at himself in the mirror, touching the crisp collar of his shirt. How do I look? Like a CEO. James's face when they entered. The study was priceless. Adrian was dressed in a tailored suit, his hair neatly trimmed, sitting straight in his wheelchair with an authority that had nothing to do with being able to walk. Adrian, I wasn't expecting... You look different. Disappointed to find me dressed for business, brother? James recovered quickly, his smooth smile sliding back into place. Not at all. I brought the final papers for the company transfer. The board is meeting tomorrow. Yes, the board meeting, I'll be there. James's smile faltered. That's not necessary. I can handle everything. Like you handled my car before the accident? The room went deadly quiet. James's face turned pale, then red. What are you talking about? Adrian wheeled himself to his desk and opened a folder. Receipts from Joe's auto shop. Signed by you, dated 3 days before my accident. Interesting work order. Brake line inspection and replacement. Funny, since I'd just had my brakes checked the month before. You're delirious, James snapped. The accident broke you, Adrian. You're seeing conspiracies where there are none. Am I? What about these? Adrian pulled out more papers. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Board meeting minutes from when I was in the coma planning the company takeover. Emails between you and Martin Davies discussing how to force me out. Dated before the accident. James lunged for the papers, but Olivia was faster. She grabbed them and stepped back. Give those to me, James growled. They're company property, Olivia said calmly, and Mr. Blackwell is still CEO. James turned to Adrian, his charm completely gone. You're making a mistake. You're in no condition to run the company. The board won't support you. We'll see about that tomorrow. After James stormed out, Adrian's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his water glass. Olivia knelt beside his wheelchair. "Are you okay?" "No," he admitted, "but I will be." He looked at her with intense eyes. "Why? Are you still here, Miss Hayes? After everything you've seen, everything you know, why stay?" "Because beneath all that pain and anger, I see someone worth fighting for." That evening, Olivia called Emily for their nightly chat. "Did Mr. Blackwell like my drawings?" Emily asked. "He loved them, sweetheart. They're hanging in his study, right. Now, when can I meet him?" "Soon, honey. He's fighting a big battle right now, but when it's over, I think he'd like to meet you very much." After the call, Olivia found Adrian in the garden again. He was looking at the stars, but his mind seemed far away. "The board meeting is at 10 tomorrow, he said without looking at her. "I haven't been in that boardroom since before the accident." "You're ready." "Am I? What if I get there and freeze? What if I can't? Then I'll be right beside you. We have the evidence. We have the truth." He turned to look at her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. Are you here because you pity me? Because your kind heart can't turn away from someone broken?" Olivia sat on the garden bench beside his wheelchair. "Do you want to know why I'm really here? Because from the first day, beneath all that anger and pain, I saw strength. I saw someone who didn't need fixing, just someone to remind him he was never broken." Adrian reached out and took her hand. His touch was gentle, uncertain, like someone who had forgotten how human contact felt. "Stay with me tomorrow," he whispered. "At the board meeting, I can't face them alone." "You won't have to. Ever again." They sat in the garden until the stars came out, his hand still holding hers, both knowing that tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. The morning of the board meeting dawned bright and clear. Adrian was already awake when Olivia arrived with his medication. "I didn't sleep," he said. "Kept thinking about the last time I was in that boardroom. I was standing then, walking, whole." "You're still whole," Olivia said, helping him with his tie. "Different, but whole." Mrs. Reynolds had outdone herself with breakfast, but Adrian barely touched his food. His hands kept straying to the briefcase containing the evidence against James. "What if it's not enough?" he asked. "It's not just the evidence they'll see today," Olivia replied. "They'll see you, the real you. Not the recluse James has been describing, but the leader who built this company." The drive to Blackwell Technologies headquarters took 30 minutes. Adrian was silent the whole way, watching the city pass by. This was his first time leaving the mansion in 2 years. The building lobby fell quiet when they entered. Employees stopped and stared as Adrian wheeled himself toward the elevator, Olivia walking beside him. Some whispered, others smiled and nodded respectfully. "Mr. Blackwell?" a security guard said, snapping to attention. "Welcome back, sir." In the executive floor, James's secretary dropped her coffee cup when she saw them. "Mr. Blackwell, we weren't expecting—" "Hello, Linda," Adrian said calmly. "Still at the same desk after all these years?" "Yes, sir. The board is already gathering in the main conference room." James was at the head of the boardroom table when they entered. The look on his face was worth every moment of preparation. "Adrian?" He recovered quickly, smoothing his expression. "This is unexpected. The strain might be too much for you." "I'm fine, James. In fact, I've never been better." The board members filed in, their shock at seeing Adrian evident. Most hadn't seen him since before the accident. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed pleased. "Now," James started, "we're here to discuss the formal transfer of—" "No," Adrian's voice cut through the room. "We're here to discuss fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." The room erupted in murmurs. James laughed nervously. "My brother is clearly unwell. This is exactly why—" "Show them," Adrian said to Olivia. She began distributing copies of the documents they'd found. "These are private company documents," James protested. "Yes, they are, my company's documents." Adrian wheeled himself to the center of the room. 2 years ago, someone tampered with my car's brakes. The police investigation was inconclusive, but these records show my brother authorized work on my car days before the accident. "That proves nothing," James shouted. "Maybe not alone, but combined with these bank records showing millions transferred to offshore accounts. And these emails discussing how to take control of the company before the accident even happened." The board members were reading, their faces growing darker with each page. "James," one of the older board members said, "is this true? It's lies. He's desperate, trying to hold on to power he's no longer fit to have." "I may be in this chair," Adrian said quietly, "but my mind is sharp as ever. While I was recovering, you stole from this company. You betrayed not just me, but everyone in this room, everyone who works for Blackwell Technologies. You can't prove any of this." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "he can." Everyone turned. A man in a dark suit entered, followed by 2 police officers. "Who are you?" James demanded. "Detective Marshall, Financial Crimes Unit. We've been building a case against you for months, Mr. Blackwell. Or should I say the younger Mr. Blackwell. Your brother's documents were the final pieces we needed." James looked around wildly, like a cornered animal. His eyes landed on Olivia. "You," he snarled. "You did this. You turned him against me." "No, James," Adrian said. "You did this. All of it. I just finally found the strength to stop you." The police moved forward. James looked at the board members, desperate. "You can't let this happen. The company needs me. The company needs its real leader back," the senior board member said, looking at Adrian. "Welcome home, son." As the police led James away, the room burst into activity. Board members surrounded Adrian, asking questions, offering support. But he was looking at Olivia. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said softly. "You had it in you all along. You just needed to believe it again." Later that evening, back at the mansion, Adrian sat in his garden. The weight of 2 years of fear and doubt was finally lifting. "Emily called," Olivia said, joining him. "She wants to know if her drawings helped you be brave today." Adrian smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his face. "Tell her they did. Tell her they helped me remember who I am." "And who is that?" "Someone who's ready to live again." He took her hand. "Someone who's ready to have dinner with a very special 7-year-old artist, if her mother approves." Olivia squeezed his hand. "I think that can be arranged." Above them, the stars came out one by one, witnesses to a man who had found not just justice, but hope. In his wheelchair in the garden, Adrian Blackwell was finally free, not from his physical limitations, but from the prison of fear and isolation he had built around himself. And beside him stood the woman who had helped him break those walls down, one magic pancake at a time. The news of James's arrest spread quickly. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, hungry for details about the Blackwell brothers' dramatic fall from power. Inside, life was changing in quieter but more meaningful ways. Adrian insisted on returning to the office the next day. "I've hidden long enough," he said as Olivia helped him with his morning routine. "My employees need to see me, really see me." "They already do," Olivia replied, straightening his collar. "You showed them yesterday who you really are." The office welcomed him like a returning hero. People stopped by his office all day, some just to say hello, others with tears in their eyes. Linda, his old secretary, brought him his favorite coffee. She'd remembered after all these years. "It's good to have you back, Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's good to be back, Linda, and please call me Adrian." At home, Adrian threw himself into physical therapy with new determination. He pushed harder, worked longer, determined to regain as much independence as possible. "Don't overdo it," Olivia cautioned during one particularly intense session. "I need to be stronger," he insisted, sweat running down his face. "I need to be better." "Better for what? You've already proven yourself." Adrian paused, looking at her with those intense eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Better for Emily. I don't want her to be afraid when she meets me." "Emily afraid of you?" Olivia laughed softly. "She already thinks you're a superhero because you liked her drawings." That weekend, they planned Emily's first visit. Adrian was more nervous than Olivia had ever seen him. He had the gardens decorated with fairy lights and ordered a small carousel to be set up on the lawn. "Is it too much?" he asked, watching the workers string up the lights. "I don't want to overwhelm her." "It's perfect. She loves anything that sparkles." Emily's reaction when she arrived made all the preparation worth it. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the fairy lights, and she squealed with delight at the carousel. "You made a fairy garden," she exclaimed, running to Adrian's wheelchair without a hint of hesitation. "Mommy said you were magic." Did she now? Adrian looked at Olivia with raised eyebrows. "No, silly," Emily giggled. "The pancakes are magic, you're just special." Something in Adrian's face softened completely. This little girl, with her innocent acceptance and pure heart, had done in seconds what others hadn't managed in years. She'd made him forget about his wheelchair entirely. "Would you like to ride the carousel?" he asked. "Only if you watch. Me, I'm going to wave every time I go around." And she did, every single time, her laughter echoing through the garden. Adrian didn't take his eyes off her once, his smile growing wider with each pass. Mrs. Reynolds brought out cookies and hot chocolate. She'd made them in special shapes, stars and hearts and little wheelchairs that made Adrian laugh out loud when he saw them. "Now you can eat magic cookies too," Emily declared, sitting on the ground next to Adrian's chair, completely comfortable in his presence. As the evening grew cooler, they moved inside. Emily insisted on showing Adrian her newest drawings. She'd made a whole series: Adrian at his office, Adrian in the garden, Adrian and her mother having pancakes. "And this one," she said, pulling out the last drawing, "is all of us together. See? We're a family." Adrian's hand trembled as he took the drawing. In Emily's childish art, there they were, him in his wheelchair, Olivia standing beside him, and Emily between them, all holding hands. Above them, a bright sun smiled down. "Do you like it?" Emily asked anxiously. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Adrian whispered. Later, after Emily had fallen asleep on one of the mansion's plush sofas, Olivia found Adrian in his study, still holding the drawing. "She sees me," he said, softly. "Not the wheelchair, not the broken man, not the bitter recluse, just me." "Children have a way of seeing the truth," Olivia replied, sitting next to him. "And the truth is, you are all of those wonderful things she draws." "Because of you," he said, taking her hand. "You and Emily, you brought color back into my world when I thought everything would stay gray forever." "No," Olivia squeezed his hand. "We just reminded you that the color was always there. You just needed to open your eyes again." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Emily's soft breathing from the sofa. Outside, the fairy lights twinkled in the garden, and somewhere in the distance, a shooting star streaked across the sky. "Make a wish," Olivia said. Adrian looked at their joined hands, at Emily's peaceful face, at the drawing that showed what his heart had been afraid to hope for. "I don't need to," he said. "Everything I could wish for is right here in this room." The days following Emily's visit brought changes no one could have predicted. Adrian threw himself into transforming the mansion's ground floor into a child-friendly space, with a playroom full of art supplies and a small library filled with children's books. "You don't have to do all this," Olivia said, watching him direct. "The decorators. I want to," he replied. "I want Emily to feel at home here." He paused, looking at her intently. "Both of you." The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning neither was quite ready to address. But something had shifted, like the first warm breeze of spring after a long winter. At the office, Adrian was making changes too. He started a foundation for children with disabilities, inspired by Emily's easy acceptance of his wheelchair. The press loved it, the story of the reformed recluse billionaire giving back to the community. "They want an interview," Linda told him one morning. "People" magazine. "They're calling it The Billionaire's Heart, a story of redemption." Adrian shook his head. "No interviews. What's happening in my life isn't for public consumption." But life had other plans. That afternoon, Sarah called Olivia in tears. "Have you seen the tabloids?" she asked. Olivia's heart sank. On every newsstand, there it was. Pictures of Emily playing in Adrian's garden, riding the carousel, sitting next to his wheelchair. The headlines were sensational. "Billionaire's secret family." "Who is the little girl who melted Adrian Blackwell's heart?" Adrian was furious when he saw the photos. "I'll sue them. I'll buy the whole newspaper and shut it down." "That won't help," Olivia said softly. "The pictures are already out there." "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to expose Emily to this." That night, Emily called upset. The kids at school were asking questions, Mommy. They said Mr. Adrian was my new daddy. Is he? Olivia felt her heart twist. No, sweetheart, Mr. Adrian is our friend. But he could be, right? He makes you smile like Daddy used to. After the call, Olivia found Adrian in the garden, staring at the carousel that still stood there, silent now without Emily's laughter. She asked if you were her new daddy, Olivia said quietly. Adrian's hands gripped his wheelchair arms tightly. And what did you tell her? The truth, that you're our friend. Is that all I am, Olivia? He turned to face her, his eyes intense. Just a friend. The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. In all these months, he'd never called her anything but Miss Hayes. Adrian, because I need to know, he continued. These feelings I have, they're not friendly, they're so much more. When I see you with Emily, when you help me without making me feel helpless, when you look at me like I'm whole. You are whole, she whispered. Because of you, you and Emily, you saved me. Not just from James, not just from my isolation, but from myself. He reached for her hand. I'm in love with you, Olivia Hayes. I think I have been since you first stood up to me, since you refused to let me push you away. Olivia felt tears in her eyes. Adrian, I know it's complicated. I know I come with baggage. The wheelchair, the media attention, a billion-dollar company. But I also know that when I'm with you and Emily, none of that matters. I'm just a man loving a woman and her amazing daughter, Mrs. Reynolds found them there in the garden an hour later, still talking, their hands intertwined. She smiled and quietly closed the curtains, giving them privacy. The next morning, Adrian had a surprise for Olivia. He'd renovated the guest house, turning it into a proper home. I want you and Emily to move in, he said. Not as my employee and her daughter, but as my family, if you'll have me. The guest house was beautiful. Emily's room was a princess's dream, with a painting nook and a window seat for reading. Olivia's suite was elegant, but comfortable, with a view of the garden. I know it's fast, Adrian said nervously, and I know there will be challenges. The media, the company, my limitations. Olivia stopped him with a gentle touch. Your limitations? Adrian, you've shown more strength in these past months than most people show in a lifetime. You rebuilt your company, faced your brother, opened your heart to a little girl who needed a father figure, and fell completely, hopelessly in love with her mother, he added softly. Outside, the garden was coming alive with spring flowers. The carousel sparkled in the morning sun, waiting for Emily's next visit. And in the mansion that had once been a prison of isolation, love was blooming like the roses in Adrian's garden, unexpected, beautiful, and completely unstoppable. The morning Olivia and Emily moved into the guest house, the whole mansion seemed to come alive. Emily's laughter echoed through the halls as she explored her new room, and Mrs. Reynolds hummed while preparing a special welcome breakfast. Look, Mr. Adrian, Emily called out, running into the kitchen. My painting corner has real artist supplies, Adrian beamed at her excitement. Only the best for my favorite artist. The word my wasn't lost on anyone. In the weeks since Adrian had confessed his feelings to Olivia, they'd been carefully navigating their new relationship, conscious of how it would affect Emily. But Emily had her own ideas about things. During breakfast, she announced, I told my teacher I have 2 houses now, one with Aunt Sarah and one with Mommy and Mr. Adrian. Adrian nearly choked on his coffee. And what did your teacher say? She said it's nice that Mommy found someone to make her smile again, like in my drawings. Later that day, while Emily was at school, Adrian had a serious talk with Olivia in his study. I want to do this right, he said. No more hiding, no more tabloid speculation. I want to announce our relationship properly. Are you sure? Olivia asked. Once it's official, everything will change. Everything already has changed. You and Emily, you're my world now. I want everyone to know it. But life had one more test in store for them. That afternoon, Adrian received an unexpected visitor, Catherine Blackwell, his mother, who had been traveling in Europe for the past year. Darling, she swept into his office, designer perfume and diamonds sparkling. I came as soon as I heard about James. Such a scandal. Adrian tensed in his wheelchair. Mother, you've been gone a long time. Well, I'm here now. And what's this I hear about you living with some housekeeper and her child? Really, Adrian, think of the family name. Her name is Olivia. Adrian's voice was steel. And Emily is more family to me than James ever was. Catherine's perfectly made-up face hardened. Don't be ridiculous. You can't possibly be serious about them. A single mother, a cleaning lady. What would your father say? Dad would have loved them, Adrian said quietly, because they love me for who I am, not what I own. Love. Catherine laughed coldly. Oh, darling, she's after your money. Can't you see that? Why else would someone like her be interested in, well, in your condition? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Adrian's hands gripped his wheelchair arms so tight his knuckles turned white. Get out! Adrian, get out! You weren't here when I needed you. You weren't here when James tried to kill me. You weren't here when I was alone and broken, but Olivia was. She saw me at my worst and loved me anyway. She and Emily gave me back my life. Catherine's face turned ugly. I'll contest this. I'll call the board. You're clearly not in your right mind. Actually, a voice came from the doorway. He's never been more clear-headed. Olivia stood there. Emily, holding her hand. They must have come to surprise Adrian for lunch. How dare you? Catherine started. No, Emily stepped forward, her small face serious. How dare you be mean to Mr. Adrian? He's the nicest, bravest person ever. And he loves us and we love him. Catherine stared at the little girl who dared stand up to her. Something in Emily's fierce protectiveness, in the way Adrian looked at her with pride, seemed to shake her certainty. You really care about them? She asked Adrian softly. They're my everything, Mother. My reason for getting up every morning, for fighting to be better, for living instead of just existing. Catherine looked at Olivia, really looked at her for the first time. She saw the strength in her stance, the love in her eyes when she gazed at Adrian. I've missed so much, Catherine whispered. I was afraid. After the accident, I couldn't bear to see you suffering. So you left, Adrian said. But they stayed. They saw past the wheelchair, past the anger, past everything I tried to use to push them away. Emily, with a child's instinct for healing, went to Catherine and took her hand. Would you like to see my drawings? I made lots of pictures of our family. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Your family? Uh-huh. There's Mommy and Mr. Adrian and me and Mrs. Reynolds, and now you can be in them too, if you want. The great Catherine Blackwell, society queen and fashion icon, knelt down in her designer suit and hugged a little girl who had just taught her what family really meant. That evening, after Catherine had left, promising to return, for Sunday dinner, Adrian found Olivia in the garden. I'm sorry about my mother, he said. Don't be. Emily worked her magic again. Adrian smiled. She gets that from her mother. You both have a way of healing broken things. You were never broken, Adrian. Just waiting for the right people to remind you how to fly. He pulled her into his lap, something he'd been shy about doing until recently. I love you, Olivia Hayes. You and Emily. You're my miracle. Above them, the first stars were coming out. In the guest house, Emily was probably adding Catherine to her family drawings. And in the garden where everything had started, two people who had found each other against all odds held on tight, knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories don't end with walking into the sunset. Sometimes they begin with learning to soar from a wheelchair. 6 months after Catherine's visit, the mansion was transformed. The once silent halls now rang with Emily's laughter, and the gardens bloomed with new life. But the biggest transformation wasn't in the house. It was in its owner. Adrian wheeled himself through the company offices, greeting employees by "Teotiskos." The bitter recluse was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to live and love again. On his desk sat Emily's latest drawing, their family portrait, now including a smiling Catherine and Mrs. Reynolds. "Mr. Blackwell," Linda called from the doorway. "Your brother's sentencing is tomorrow." Adrian nodded. James had pleaded guilty to all charges, hoping for a lighter sentence. "Thank you, Linda. And remember, it's Adrian." That evening he found Olivia and Emily in their favorite spot in the garden. Emily was teaching her mother how to make flower crowns, something she'd learned at school. "Mr. Adrian," Emily jumped up. "I made one for you too." He laughed as she placed the crown of daisies on his head. "How do I look?" "Like a king," Olivia said softly. Our king. Later, after Emily was asleep, Adrian took Olivia for a moonlight ride in the garden. He'd had paths installed that were perfect for his wheelchair, winding through the flower beds and around the carousel that was now a permanent fixture. I've been thinking, he said, stopping near the rose garden, about James's sentencing tomorrow. You nervous? No, for the first time I'm at peace with it all. He made his choices, I've made mine. He turned to face her. Which brings me to something important. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. I built walls around myself, pushed everyone away. Then you came along, you and Emily. You didn't try to fix me, you just loved me exactly as I am. Tears were forming in Olivia's eyes as Adrian opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. I'm not asking you to be my caretaker anymore. I'm asking you to be my wife, to let me be Emily's father in every way that matters, to build a life together. Not because you have to, but because we want to. Adrian, I know it won't always be easy. I know there will be challenges. But I also know that with you and Emily by my side, I can face anything. So, Olivia Hayes, will you marry me? Before she could answer, a small voice came from behind them. Say yes, Mommy. They turned to see Emily in her pajamas, Mrs. Reynolds trying to look apologetic behind her. She insisted on seeing the garden one last time before bed, Mrs. Reynolds explained, but she was smiling. Olivia looked at Adrian, at the ring, at her daughter's hopeful face. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. The next day, after James's sentencing, reporters clamored for a statement from Adrian. Instead of his usual no comment, he stopped his wheelchair at the courthouse steps. Today isn't about my brother's crimes, he said. It's about new beginnings. Which is why I'm happy to announce my engagement to Olivia Hayes, the woman who taught me that love doesn't see limitations, only possibilities. The media went wild, but Adrian didn't care. He wheeled himself to where Olivia and Emily waited. Ready to go home, he asked. Home, Emily said, skipping alongside his wheelchair. I like how that sounds. That night the family gathered for dinner. Catherine, who had become a doting grandmother to Emily, brought champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Emily. Mrs. Reynolds outdid herself with a feast and even joined them at the table, because as Emily insisted, she was family too. A toast, Catherine raised her glass. To love that heals, to family that grows, and to second chances. And to magic pancakes, Emily added, making everyone laugh. Later, Adrian found himself back in the garden where it had all started, the place where a bitter man in a wheelchair had first met a caretaker who would change his life, where a little girl's drawings had brought color back to his world, where love had proven stronger than any limitation. Olivia joined him, her ring catching the starlight. What are you thinking about? About how lucky I am, about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you to the best things in life. Emily ran out to join them, another flower crown in her hands. I made more. Now we all match. As Adrian sat there in his wheelchair, wearing a crown of daisies, his fiancée by his side, and his soon-to-be daughter dancing in the moonlight, he realized something profound. He had spent so long after his accident focusing on what he had lost, he had almost missed the miracle of what he had found. A family, a love, a life more beautiful than any he could have imagined while standing on his own 2 feet. I love you, he said, looking at Olivia and Emily. Both of you, more than I ever thought possible. We love you too, Emily said, climbing into his lap while Olivia squeezed his hand. Forever and ever. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. But Adrian didn't need to make a wish. Everything he had ever wanted was right here, in a garden filled with love, in a wheelchair crowned with flowers, in the hearts of a woman and child who had taught him that the greatest healing comes not from learning to walk again, but from learning to love again. And this time he knew their love would last forever.